Good evening, everybody. Is there an echo in here? Welcome to the Newberg City Council, August 19, 2024 meeting. I call this meeting to order. Could we have a roll call, please?
Counselor McBride,
Here.
Counselor Wheatley,
Here.
Counselor Yarnell Holloman,
Here.
Counselor Kilberg,
Here.
Mayor Rosacker,
Here.
Counselor Cloyd is absent, and Counselor Carmen.
Here. Shall we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance?
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The first item on our agenda is the city manager's report.
Good evening, Honourable Mayor and Councillors, and of course this is our statistics portion, and it's for statistics that came from the June month, and here we go. For planning, combined planning decisions of all sorts, there were 9. Building permits for housing units, there were 8. And I note that this, although it has been trending a little lower than in previous times, it hasn't been too bad actually for construction. So it's been, as you see from the line, it's been wavering around between 8 and 10 units. And so it hasn't fallen off a cliff despite the high interest rates. Permits of other types, 71. And similarly, a little lower than we've seen in previous years, but not cataclysmically so. Building inspections conducted by just 1.5 people, 739 building inspections of all sorts. Community engagement. There were 26 specific questions that came at us through the website that were answered during the period. And as you can see, that has been steadily trending up over the last couple of years. Don't know what's going on, but the echo's gone away. That's cool. Community engagement, social media engagement, 13,827. And that has ticked up a lot recently. On socials, Facebook, 4179, others, 828. And LinkedIn 446. And with the other platform, that's where a lot of our engagement is coming from, as we've diversified that slightly. The city recorder only took, during this period, 2 public records requests, but wait till you get a load of this month. This month has been gangbusters, but we'll come to that later. $1.9 million of payments to accounts payable and 1.1 million of payroll. And you can see that year on year, the payroll has slowly gone up over time with COLA, as you would expect. HR activity, there was 1 recruitment advertised, hires 0, separation 0, and 5 amongst the many ranges of different claims that we do. And of course, as I always like to emphasize for folks following along at home, a claim is not necessarily something bad. It is actually quite often us helping somebody get a FEMLA requirement or something to help for ADA reasons. So that is good activity. IT resolved a whopping 226 service tickets, and that was a fairly busy period recently. And of those, there were 3 that had them out in the middle of the night to solve something wrong with a server or something like that. Library door count, there was 9,385 visits, generating 31,547 circulation events, considerably higher than was generated by the previous library director. And I've heard that the summer high for summer reading month has actually been over 35,000. So that is kind of mind-boggling, the way that has grown in the last few years. Public safety, 2,425 calls for service, quite a bit more than the averages. So that was a very busy period that we've just seen. And 749 traffic stops. Once again, that is a lot more than we've seen on average and recently. And that indicates that there's been some fairly unsafe driving happening, and luckily the officers are dealing with that for us. 480 citations and warnings, and no surprise there, that has trended up with the stops. So, you know, folks, if you're reading this, please slow down, obey the posted speed limit, and think about the children who are also walking down the side of the road. And 9 DUIs, not the worst we've seen, but not a very good number for that month. Dispatch, 813 911 calls and a whopping 2,644 non-emergency calls. And even though it's quieter than the averages, that is still a tremendous amount of calls to help people. And many of those are simply quality of life things where our team helps folks get information that they need. Water production, 91.7 million gallons and 75.8 million gallons of the other stuff being treated. 1,107 work orders completed and 59.6 megawatt hours of energy generated as we move into peak summer generation. And I have a few other data points here, which I thought were at my fingertips. Oh, here we go. Whew. Amongst those accounts payables, the three highest check amounts were Chehalem Parks and Recreation District, a system development charge transfer, $101,213. The annual policy renewal for SAFE for workers' compensation, $151,397, and OpenGov, the implementation fee for our new permitting software, part of our customer service push, $78,400. And the position that we were recruiting for was a maintenance supervisor because of a recent retirement of Vance. So that's just a bit more information about that. Any questions, folks?
Hey, Will, I was hoping that you could talk a little bit about the SRO information. We've decided to fund them for a year, but I was hoping to talk to you about the fiscal impact that this would have on our budget.
So the fiscal impact is we are losing for this year $250,000 that we thought was going to be coming into the general fund to support the SRO program. And on balance, given the problems that have beset the school district's finances, it seemed like the decent and ethical thing to do to still provide the two SROs for this year and look towards their next budget cycle next year to see if they can come to an agreement with us rather than the whole program being cancelled, or something that none of us would want, to give them a breathing space to try to get things going again. But yes, the impact of this is $250,000 that was budgeted, which is now not coming into the general fund.
So Will, when you gave the report about the solar panel field, the megawatt hours that generates, how does that relate to the amount that a house would use? Like, is that in a day or a week, or how much does that relate to a house, average house use?
So Councillor McBride, I'll be honest with you, unless Russ knows that at his fingertips, I wouldn't like to state that without looking that up to give you a really good, accurate number, and he wasn't expecting that either, so do you happen to know, Russ, what that's equivalent now?
I don't know what it's equivalent to, but I can tell you it's anywhere from 17 to 22% of the electrical consumption of the wastewater treatment plant had we not had the solar farm. So right now it's making up about 22% of what our normal electric charges would be.
But I also most assuredly will discover what that is for a typical household or how many households that might be.
Okay, I have a similar question about the solar panels. So are you saying that we get to use that electricity that it generates? Or,
So the electricity that it generates creates an offset against the bills that we would have to pay to PGE to run the wastewater plant. So, you know, just under 20% of those electricity costs are met by that. Now, of course, to be frank and transparent, the return on investment time is 11 or 12 years for that particular plant. So obviously, it will take a long time to pay for itself. And we do know that if we were to build the same plant in 2 more years, as we have today, it would run more efficiently because those panels are getting more efficient all the time. So that's kind of the net effect.
Is it not true with, that situation that we sell the power back to the electric company at wholesale? And then we have to buy the same amount of power back at retail, is that correct?
That is my understanding, yes. Yep.
All right, thank you, Will.
Cheers.
Next, we have, new business, the Oregon Zero Emissions Fueling Infrastructure Grant.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. We're here to do a little presentation on the Oregon Zero Emission Fueling Infrastructure Grant. This is a grant that is through the Department of Environmental Quality. It is a one-time $15 million funded program. The grant funding has been accounted for everywhere through the state. So right now, they're just waiting for everybody to accept those grants. What I want to do is give you a little bit of background on how we got here. You know, what's it entail and how we got here. In June of 2019, the state legislature enacted Senate Bill 1044. And what that did was set forth goals for electric vehicles throughout the state. And they said light duty vehicles, which meant every passenger car, every SUV, and every light pickup 3/4 ton or less, a goal of being 90% electric by 2035. Now that was enacted by the state legislature in 2019. During that time, it would also require the state to do reports on the number of registered electric vehicles throughout the state, with a goal of having 50,000 registered by 2020 and 250,000 registered by 2025. The state did not meet any of those goals. So the next step, and in that bill, it said something shall happen by 2035. So what happened in the next step was DEQ took that directive and enacted the Advanced Clean Cars 2 rule through DEQ. Now, this is not a Senate bill. This is not a House bill. This is a permanent rule through DEQ. And it was enacted in December 19, 2022. And what they did with the enaction of that is they adopted the California clean car regulations. California code regulations. Anyway, I've got the number here. And what that did was state that model years, the California Code of Regulations, Division 3, Chapter 1, and I can get the article number on here, provided a percentage that EVs can only be sold, new vehicles sold in the state of Oregon. And, Oregon, along with the state of Washington, adopted the exact same rule, the California, regulations. So by 2026, and these are model years, this is not a calendar year. This is vehicle model years is what it applies to. A vehicle model year can come out on January 2nd, the year before the actual year. So vehicle model year 2035 is January 2nd, 2034. Is when these apply. For example, 2026, 35% of all new vehicles sold in the state of Oregon must be, according to the DEQ rule, electric or hybrid electric or alternate fueled, which means hydrogen. Now, hydrogen station's about $1 million to compress hydrogen for fuel. By 2030, 68% of all new vehicles sold in the state, passenger vehicles, SUVs, all SUVs, and all light pickups, 3/4 ton or less, must be electric, plug-in hybrid, or alternate fuel. This number continues up. Model year 2034 is 94%, and model year 2035 is 100% in the state. Now, the state of Oregon is not the only one that's doing this. As of right now, California, Washington, Oregon, Colorado, New Mexico, Maine, Vermont, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, New York, Delaware, Maryland, the District of Columbia, and Virginia have adopted the California standard for 2035. That's on there that requires this ramping up of the policy. One of the other things that the Oregon Clean Car 2 Act does is it's mandated to our two largest power suppliers in the state, PP&L and Portland General Electric, to increase their capacity for providing charging facilities for these cars to meet the demand in 2035. So there's a separate, from the vehicles, there's a separate mandate on the electric providers to provide this. So in 9 years, the city of Newberg, along with every other city, every other county within the state, is being mandated by the state regulations and by DEQ that if we buy new vehicles, they must be electric, that our passenger vehicles, SUVs or pickup trucks must be electric, plug-in hybrid, or alternate power fueled that's on there. So in moving forward in talking about this, and we're taking a look at it, currently the state agencies themselves are under a 25% mandate. All of their vehicles that meet that category, they must buy our electric at this time, 25%. Moving towards that 100% that they do. And they, the state can mandate this on their own agencies. So taking a look at it, we tried to determine what is the best course of action that is the most financially responsible way to act. And so we applied for this OZEF, the Oregon grant for the alternative fuel, the zero emissions fueling infrastructure grant, which would provide up to 50% of the cost of the installation of the charging facilities. And that would be a level 3, level 2 chargers. And the infrastructure would be sufficient to support what we anticipate as a build out for the next 35 years. Beyond that, to be able to provide that capacity. So we applied for the grant. We were awarded the grant through DEQ that will provide half the cost. In discussions with Preston, we feel that we had to provide them a hard number, working with PGE and electric providers, taking a look at that. We're confident that that number will be less, but again, the grant can only provide up to 50% of the construction cost, which we currently have budgeted funds to do. Preston has some more information that we have looked at our electric vehicles currently that we have. We have the electric street sweeper. We've got a couple of Ford Lightnings. that we're taking a look at. And just for a side note, and he can talk a little bit better on that. We currently have 31 vehicles that meet that criteria of passenger vehicle, SUV, and this is in Public Works. It does not include the police department vehicles because they are, by definition, excluded from the requirement based on the fact that it's an emergency service. Police, fire vehicles have been excluded from this requirement simply because there's times that their vehicles cannot meet the needs of those vehicles cannot be met by the standard that was set, which is 150 miles of range that must be provided for these vehicles in 2035. So Preston can talk a little bit more about that, but we have 31 vehicles currently that are not surplus, that are currently in use by our Public Works or administration that we have. And out of those, we have 2 Ford Lightning pickup trucks that are electric and the electric street sweeper. And we have 1 truck that is, we got the 100% grant on that is coming, that is a chain hook lift truck with interchangeable bodies that's coming that is electric as well.
So I got off a meeting with DEQ today. We were talking about classes 7, 8 vehicles. The only exemptions that there will be for those are for school buses and refuge trucks. They're not looking at doing any other exemptions. And with the carb reductions that is being required, what I'm being told by manufacturers is Cummins is only gonna have 1 engine that would be qualified to be sold in the state of Oregon as of now. And they have no plans on making any other adjustments to any of their other motors. So trying to get a hold of vehicles could become more difficult as well. The options are gonna be electric or hydrogen. Hydrogen is extremely expensive. It's double the price of a lot of the electric trucks. So with that said, Russ and I have been working together, trying to get grants to position ourselves while there's free money to take advantage of. And so far it's penciled out. The F-150, we compared it to the new Tundras we've been buying. And right now, in a 5-year replacement schedule, it pencils out to be $2,200 above the gas trucks as of right now. Part of the reason is the fuel for electricity is really a lot less. So we're about, in a 5-year cost, $4,800 in fuel for the Tundras. And you're looking at about $978 for electricity. And the reason that is with Columbia. I compared the F-150 Lightning to the Tundras we bought,
Which is the gasoline powered
the
vehicle.
gasoline powered vehicles. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And we work with Columbia, Willamette Clean Cities, and what we're able to do is when we track the electricity that we're using to charge these vehicles, we can sell and get carbon credits back. Now, I took a very conservative approach on the numbers that they were estimating. And that's where we came up with the $978 is what we'd be paying in electricity for those F-150s over 5 years, based at today's rate for power. Okay. $978.15 for 5 years, based off today's rate. That's for a total of 5 years. Per year, you'd be looking at $195 a year. Okay. For the street sweeper, and these bigger vehicles is where it pencils out a lot more. The electric sweepers are $589,000 to purchase, compared to diesel of $317,000 for a similar model. However, the fuel cost is huge. In 1 year, you're looking at $17,493 in diesel. For electricity, you're looking at $3,894 for the year. Columbia Willamette Clean Cities believes we will be getting $5,000 to $6,000 in carbon credits back each year based off this. I plugged in 4,000, which still gives us a negative of 105, which means we'd be turning a profit with our carbon credits versus our fuel. An overall savings of $17,493 each year in fuel that we're not paying. In the 5-year replacement that we're looking at, that's $87,000 in savings. And with the original grant of $293,000 investment, the return on investment when we go to sell, we're gonna look at being ahead of $147,000. Versus if we were to wait till 2035 and start jumping into this and have to fully fund these programs, we would have been behind $145,000 with our first sweeper. And we would never have caught up.
So for comparison, in the past, using a street sweeper, we buy a street sweeper. The thing with the old conventional diesel street sweepers is they destroy themselves because of the environment they work in. It's a diesel engine. Most have 2 engines to have to run the equipment, and the environment they work in is very dirty. The electric street sweeper that we have is operating on a different thing. It doesn't have the mechanical parts that it requires. It's vacuum. It's a giant vacuum cleaner, and basically we have wear components, which are the brushes on the front that bring it in. You have wear brushes that wear on conventional street sweepers. When a conventional is done, it is done. I have been here and sold 3 different street sweepers, and the most we ever got for one was $5,000 returned after spending close to $400,000 for it after 8 years, simply because of the nature of what they are. The electric, it's a new market and we don't know, but we're anticipating that prior to the end of the warranty on the battery, we turn it and we can get a return on it from a smaller agency or smaller group, because they're going to be in the process of having to buy electric and not being able to buy new. And part of the generation information that I've been able to gain is they are now reconfiguring those batteries. They're rebuilding them. It's not just like a Duracell, take it out, throw it away and put another one in. They're able to completely recondition those batteries and put them back in and reuse them with that. So technology is changing daily on this. But one of the things that we really took a hard look at is positioning ourselves in such a way that we are not behind the 8 ball come 8 years from now, when every community is scrambling to try and put these in. Taking a look at the compounded interest that may inflationary index of 5% or 3%, we're taking a look at probably an increase in costs of anywhere from 40 to 60% over 8 years for the installation costs, and the fact that everybody is going to be forced to be in the same boat, and taking the advantage of the ability to get a 50% grant from DEQ when the grant funds have already been committed, and it's a one-time opportunity that was presented to us. Basically, it will pay for half of it. We have the other half currently in the existing budget from the Public Works funds to provide that, and it will provide how many vehicles, the infrastructure that we've done on
It'll
that?
provide a full build out up to 15 level 2s and 2 level 3s once full build out is done. The big part of this is getting the infrastructure in the ground and the transformer put in with PGE. Then all we have to do is add the chargers as we go and pull new wire. It's just about getting the conduit and everything in the ground.
One of the other components we looked at is PGE also has some potentially grant opportunities with the installation. However, it comes with a caveat. And that is we tell PGE how much power we're going to use. And if we don't use it, we pay them back in a given year. And rather than put ourselves into a position where that would happen, where we could potentially be paying them back the entire amount, we decided to go with this direction on here. We do have the ability through Columbia Willamette Clean Cities Coalition to get rebates and buy down the charging units themselves. significantly because we are a member of that, organization. So what would normally cost us $2,000 for a level 2 charger, we can get for about half that cost.
And we have worked with PGE and we have secured a grant through them that we do not have to pay anything back or commit anything to for the, cover some of the cost of the chargers as well.
So the chargers are gonna be free. It's the infrastructure getting it in. PGE does have the sufficient, capabilities in our location to put the charger, to provide this power for the charging system that is there. And that's why we've come before, council to bring this information here and request, your approval to accept the OSEV, grant. And I don't remember the exact amount. It's about 200 and,
So we're requesting to accept the grant for $257,200 and approving the city manager to spend the $428,200 as for the project.
questions?
Thank you for asking. You mentioned several times it's 50% of the cost, but 257 is well over 50% of 428,000.
It's actually 80%. And the budgeted number is a little bit lower than the 428 for the project, but we're putting a little bit extra in there for unforeseeable events. As every project I've ever built has unforeseeable events. You know, we try to plan the best we can, but we need to prepare for a few unforeseeables.
You have a follow-up, so that the state doesn't care that you're getting more than your targeted amount? Or do you plug in the unforeseeables
we
in
have
your
to plug in
application?
20%. We have to show charges up to 20%. The nice thing about that is my project management, labor, and some of the things that I will be doing for that counts towards that 20%. So I just got to track it with our cartograph software, and any equipment and things we use also go to that, plus the money we spend all adds up to that 20%. And then we can claim 80% back with this grant up to 257. So if we spend more, we'll have to cover the rest.
This will be located at Public Works then?
Yes.
Is it installed now?
No,
And if not, how are you charging these things?
So right now we have a level 2 charger that came with the sweeper that we did a temp install inside a facility that is charging it. It's not efficient enough. We can't get a full day's use out of it. We need a level 3 charger so that when we come in at lunch, we can charge it at 80 kilowatts an hour. We will be able to run a full 8 to 10 hours on that sweeper, which will allow us to increase production. Plus, we just got the correct hopper because it was sent with the wrong hopper. Our production should go up because it's twice the size of what the original one was now.
So I was doing some math here. You said we spent $590,000 on Sweeping Beauty. A diesel costs 317, roughly half the cost. So if we use that machine for 8 years at your cost of $17,000 per fuel, that's $140,000 in fuel. So considering that we saved $300,000 on the purchase by buying the diesel, it seems to me that $140,000 for diesel is pretty reasonable cost.
We got $293,000 paid by a grant. So you take 500 and that 590 and minus.
It was-
But you're not always gonna get grants.
Correct, but in the future, we're gonna be required to buy an electric street sweeper. And so this is a way to get in, and then we can take those funds and keep rolling it forward to buy the future vehicles.
it also provides us an opportunity for carbon credits, which again is another offset that we can, it's paperwork, it's magic money. If you want to look at it that way, the carbon credits. What we reduce in carbon use, we can sell those credits to another agency, a clearinghouse, who will buy them and pay for them because they can apply them towards a project that they have. And it's it's magic money. That's done through, the Clean Water, Coalition that does that. We're reducing an amount of carbon. They need that credit, for their project, so they will pay for those credits.
And talking to multiple different fleet departments from around the state, what they're seeing and predicting is about a 45% reduction in maintenance costs with these electric vehicles. So with the street sweeper over a 5-year life cycle, which is what we would probably replace it at, you'd be looking at close to $37,000 in savings compared to if we had a diesel model.
So I know this has nothing to do with the action in front of us, but we don't have any idea what those used electric pickups are gonna sell for when you decide to move them. You're selling them in 5 years, is that right?
That is the plan, because right now, data has shown that gas vehicles and things like that, the return on investment, the kind of that perfect year is around 5 years to get the most free money. We're hoping the electric trucks are similar, but
So
as you said, we don't
Have you
the
been
data.
paying attention to the market for used electric vehicles in the United States? I mean, it's not good.
You're 100% right. But with the technology and where we're gonna be required to go, things are gonna change. I don't have a crystal ball to know where that's at. A lot of the market right now are smaller vehicles and not trucks. It's hard to say. I agree. Right now, it's not great, but in 5 years, I don't know. But as Russ said, the DEQ is pushing this and requiring us to do it. And as DEQ said in the meeting today, the free money's now. And as we get closer to these dates, this free money is gonna start tapering away.
You know, and again, these vehicles are specific use vehicles. You know, it's not something we intend to take out of town or to take somewhere else. And the Ford Lightnings have the ability for us to not carry a generator, a gas-powered generator. We can actually use the Lightning for, guys working on site. They can plug right in, and utilize it right there when we do that. So that's one less additional piece of equipment that we have to own and maintain, as part of that. Again, we have no idea what they're gonna be worth in 5 years. It's watching the market. It's taking a look at it. These are third and fourth generation, electric vehicles versus the first generation, which are the ones that are really up for sale now.
Oh, just out of curiosity, let's say that something like the Chevron doctrine come around and made it illegal for DEQ to make these kind of mandates. If the mandates weren't there, would you still buy electric vehicles for us, or do you think that you would stay with gasoline?
Personally, my opinion, I would stay with gasoline. But we're trying to be prudent in responding to the state laws that we have to adapt to. Given what we know now and everything that's out there, we would continue down the gasoline path or the diesel path. And we're not doing it wholesale. We're just doing it for very specific vehicles for very specific use. It's not, we're gonna replacing all of them, but DQ and the state mandate will it by 2034 require us to do so when we buy new vehicles.
Honourable Mayor and councillors, of course, staff have to respond to the legal framework that we find ourselves in at the time of making these decisions. While it is clearly true, your point is well made, the Chevron decision could remove some of these administrative rules. But each time we make one of these kind of decisions, the staff does its best to figure out what the right decision should be at this moment. And of course, we can change direction if we have to, admittedly with the loss of capital. That is what we will lose. We'll lose some capital. But, you know, given where we're at right now with this regulation, I think we have to proceed.
I have one more question. You said we had 31 of these. You told us what 3 of them are. What are the rest of the vehicles we have?
We have 31 passenger vehicles, SUVs, or light pickups, half tons or smaller. They're gasoline powered, that are used by the wastewater treatment plant, the water treatment plant, public works maintenance, and a few pool cars for administration to use, around the state. These are all gasoline powered. We only have 3 electric vehicles. We have 31 that would meet the criteria when we replace them. If it's 34 or later, they would have to be electric, given the current laws in the state of Oregon.
We have had a lot of success with the F-150. We have a 500-gallon vac trailer, which is about 10,000 pounds. We tow it around. We do work all week and we're only charging it once a week. So we're doing very good. I've talked to many other counties. The F-150s are doing great. And the purchase price is only $3 to $4 grand more than what the gas versions are.
So would anyone like to make a motion? All right, I'll start. I move that we approve order number 2024-3946 as written.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Thank you. Good evening, James and Scott. We're gonna talk about the
Good evening.
sequential urban growth boundary.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council, Scott Siegel, Community Development Director, and joining me is James Dingwall, Assistant Planner. And we're before you this evening to help you sort of resume your discussion and consideration of different options that are available to the city for your work on the sequential urban growth boundary update. This pertains to 2 city council goals relating to housing, as well as employment and economic development. And Mr. Dingwall will be presenting high-level responses to the questions that the council had posed to staff and the direction that you had provided back in June, primarily researching the different options that are available to the city as the public hearing process that the city began on, as you may recall, 3 different components to this work was paused in June so that we could come back to you with this information that you've requested. So I just wanted to remind the council that where you're at in the process is that through a duly noticed hearing, the city did begin the hearing process that could lead to adoption of 1 or more of these studies that are before you this evening. By putting this on pause and asking staff to research other options that are available to the city, we could come back pursuant to your direction with a proposal for housing urban growth boundary, a proposal for employment and industrial lands urban growth boundary work, a combination of the 2, or nothing at all. So you have options in a number of ways. There are certain obligations that we have with the state, and Mr. Dingwall will walk through those with you. And there is one new item that we will be sharing with you, and it is in the council report that was not available to us before June. And this is the legislation, Senate Bill 1537, approved by the state legislature in the most recent session. And so we wanted to make sure you had that information and could consider that along with these other proposals that are before you. And I did want to highlight that that Senate Bill 1537 option, which is a one-time, a limited one-time urban growth boundary expansion for housing, is independent of this other work. And so as we go through this, you may consider it. It's not, one is not predicated on the other. So they can run independently, or you could choose not to do that. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Dingwall.
All right, good evening, counselors. So as Scott mentioned, tonight we'll be going over some of those updates from DLCD for you all to further consider the sequential and potential urban growth boundary efforts. Overall, staff's recommendation is that the city requests that the Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development modify the approved sequential UGB work program to include the adoption of the economic opportunities analysis and to reschedule the city's adoption of an updated housing needs analysis and housing production strategy to align with the with DLCD's 2027-2028 schedule for compliance with state housing requirements. And then staff is also recommending that council consider, as Scott mentioned, whether to explore the one-time UGB amendment provided by Senate Bill 1537. So this deliberation and work furthers council's goals 2 and 5, identifying industrial land and attracting employers to provide family wage jobs and increasing land for housing. So the first item for us to review is the ability of council to request modifications to the approved sequential work program. And DLCD indicated that the population projections that come from Portland State's Population Research Center in the 2021 HNA may not be modified, but that other elements such as some of the assumptions or the buildable lands inventory that assesses the kind of on the ground development capacity may be modified, although any changes that the city makes would be subject to review at the time of approval. The city may also modify the work program components. So, for example, to only adopt the economic opportunities analysis and then consider a potential future UGB amendment only for employment lands. If the council chooses this option, staff recommends that the city request to be included in the 2027-2028 housing planning cycle, when other jurisdictions will also be conducting housing planning under the new state framework that's currently undergoing rulemaking now. Any housing planning conducted in this 2027-2028 cycle would use the new population forecasts that were just issued this June. So to summarize kind of the broad strokes of the work program modifications, the major options that DLCD confirmed to us would be: 1, modifying the HNA as permitted prior to adoption; 2, to split the EOA and HOA and adopt them separately after possibly modifying the HNA; or 3, removing the HNA from the work program, only adopting the EOA, and then planning for that later housing planning work cycle. So the request to modify the approved work program, similar to the initial election that we went through earlier this year, would require county concurrence and then DLCD approval again, and would look to provide findings that the modified plan either includes enhanced coordination with other jurisdictions, addresses issues of state planning goals raised in the work review process, issues in the organization of the work program itself, or addresses issues that were omitted from the original work program. So kind of one of those 4 items to justify the change that we're proposing to the state.
I would just add that I think that the change in conditions or community factors is something that we would emphasize if we were to ask the state to change the work program, that the population forecast is substantially different than it was in the previous round. We certainly have development trends and data that we could use to inform our work now that were not as clear in 2019. So there are a lot of data points that we could refer to that reflect sort of this one criterion that I think James was pointing out, that due to changes in the community, we could make that ask.
So the second point raised in the RCA was that in addition to these conversations with the LCD, we also reached out to some peer cities that have been or are currently conducting UGB work over the past few years to see some of the examples of costs being incurred. In particular, we heard from Turner, who went through a 49-acre expansion for residential land. It spent approximately $100,000. Their staff estimated that approximately half that cost was for the housing needs analysis, and half the cost was for the steps 2 and 3, the efficiency measures and the UGB amendment. Sisters is currently going through a UGB amendment review process where somewhere between 206 and 256 acres of both residential and employment land are being evaluated. And they've spent, from their staff, approximately $365,000 so far. About a third of that for the efficiency measures, which included an update to their housing plan, approximately 26,000 for a UJB sufficiency report, which is not one of the official steps required by the state, but was an additional sufficiency analysis that they chose to go through. And then so far, $239,000 for the UJB amendment itself, which they're currently in the process of evaluating. And then finally, Woodburn. So a little bit different place, but they are currently updating their employment lands. They spent approximately $50,000 to update their EOA and BLI, and then are doing some work in-house on the steps 2 and 3, the efficiency measures and the UGB amendment. So then the third element in the RCA, as Scott mentioned, is the new pathway for adding some residential land through Senate Bill 1537's one-time UGB expansion. The bill allows an expansion of up to 100 acres, subject to some concept planning requirements and long-term affordability requirements for housing on that land. Once the city has demonstrated its need for both affordable housing and that additional land. So the city must demonstrate the need for additional land by either not having adopted any UGB amendments for residential uses in the last 20 years, and also not having any undeveloped contiguous tracts greater than 20 acres within the city, or having adopted a UGB amendment over that 20 years, and that 75% of those lands have been developed. The cities then must demonstrate the need for affordable housing by showing that the city has either a greater share of severely burdened households in the state, or at least 25%. And so Newberg currently meets both of the second categories here. In 2006, the city did a UGB expansion for approximately 7.5 acres of medium density residential in West Newberg. And that has largely been developed. And then the recent data given to the city is that 25.7% of renters are severely rent burdened. So we do qualify through this pathway if council chooses to adopt it. So the land to be included in that one-time addition has a couple criteria. It must be adjacent to the existing UGB and also must be designated either an urban reserve, non-resource land, or it must be subject to an acknowledged exception to the broader statewide planning goals related to farmland or forest land. If the city chose to pursue this pathway, there would be a solicitation for applications from property owners of sites with concept plans, which would include the types and affordability levels of the housing proposed, any non-residential, so commercial or recreation designations on that land, and then a proposed transportation network. And then the bill also indicates that at least 30% of the units must be subject to affordability restrictions for at least 60 years. The bill, no.
Have you looked at a map to see if we have 100 acres inside our urban growth reserve that would qualify?
We have heard from kind of as we've been going through the kind of sequential process, we have been hearing from property owners who are adjacent who have expressed interest, kind of largely prior to this bill kind of being an option. So we haven't necessarily overlapped those interested parties and kind of any other options, but could evaluate that if council chose to pursue this option.
I'm doubting that we have land that would even meet the criteria.
Well,
Because our
it
urban
doesn't have
growth
to be 100
reserve
acres.
is our urban growth boundary in most of the land with the exception of the Austin property.
Well,
So
it doesn't have to be all three of those. It can be urban reserve or non-resource land, or so it has to meet one of those types
Okay,
of
so have we checked? I mean, this could be a short conversation. If we don't have those,
Mayor, yeah, with all respect, it could be a very short conversation. So really what we're looking for is if you're interested in having us explore this, we would do that research and due diligence. And then if it appears to be a viable option, we would ask for this council's time to consider it in a study session and to really study it. This is new. Of course, the legislature just approved it in the last session. It's untested, so we don't know how other jurisdictions are approaching it.
And I think in addition to kind of, if we have that land that qualifies, the process is also that landowners would kind of apply to be it. So there's kind of the dual aspect of having it, but then also having property owners that want to be the site chosen to be expanded. So it's the two elements there.
Yeah, and I think what appealed to us in looking at this is that it's property owner and developer driven in terms of the city isn't going out and targeting properties. But it would be property owners and developers who are coming forward and competitively through a solicitation process, making their proposals. And so with the affordability requirement going along with this, it's entirely possible that there would be no takers, there'd be no interest in it. But if there is, and someone comes forward and they say, you know, we have the right capital stack for an affordable project along with a market rate project, and it may not be 100 acres, it might only be 20 acres or 40 acres. And if they are able to put something together that works and it meets these fairly prescriptive criteria, there's a clear path that the state's provided for the city to offer this. So I totally hear you. We may find that there's no suitable sites, there's no willing property owners. But if it is a viable path for someone, we're asking if you would want to explore it.
And then process-wise, so while the solicitation and then approval would have to be approved by DLCD, the one-time pathway that doesn't follow that, you know, broader UGB expansion for housing that we've been discussing in the other conversation. So it's also just kind of a different, shorter pathway, while still subject to approval, that might not be as intensive for a smaller amount of land. In addition to that one-time 100 acre, the bill does provide two alternative options. So the 100 acre requires that concept planning where the applicant would come with a proposal for the types of housing and transportation and utilities. If somebody were to propose and the city select a 15 acres, up to 15 acre small site, that concept plan is not required, but the site would still have to meet the affordability requirements and urban services, such as wastewater, stormwater, et cetera. The second option is a land swap. So the city can choose to add one or more sites to the UGB and simultaneously remove one or more sites, provided that the sites are roughly the same size, are currently zoned for residential uses, and the added sites must be denser than, or at the same or denser level than the sites removed. And then all of these options sunset on January 2nd, 2033. So there is kind of a window for the city to explore and then pursue this between that. So staff's recommendation again is that the city requests that the DLCD modify the approved sequential work program to include the adoption of the EOA and reschedule the city's adoption of an updated housing needs analysis to comply with the DLCD 2027-2028 schedule. And then also consider whether to explore this one-time UGB amendment as provided by Senate Bill 1537. We're happy to answer any other questions.
This is going to sound like I didn't study, but I really studied. It's just very technical. Why are you suggesting or recommending that the EOA only portion of this be adopted now, as opposed to the housing needs analysis or whatever?
Thank you, Councilor Newberg. Really a combination of things. One was that we were getting a sense through the council's earlier deliberation that the housing needs analysis wasn't going to meet the community's needs in some ways. And I think part of that was a reflection on, that work began in 2019, probably earlier than that is when it actually kicked off. And a lot has changed in the community. And so there is sort of an opportunity, I think, if we're going to reset, if we're going to restart this, we would have new population forecast as a basis for that. And we know that the 2024 forecast with the same horizon, I think it's at 2035, has us growing at a somewhat faster clip, albeit not rapid, but it's an increase in population over what the prior population forecast had us achieving within the same time frame. And if we stay with the current sequential work program and the housing needs analysis that's been developed up to this point, we would be locked in, or we are locked in with the prior forecast. So one reason for considering resetting this, going with the 2027-28 cohort of cities, is that we would be able to use that more recent forecast. We would also update our buildable lands inventory, which it sounds like we would have the ability to do that on some level with our current work program. But we would, of course, want to do that if we were preparing a new housing needs analysis. We would update the buildable lands inventory. We would factor in all the recent growth and development, including projects that are now in the pipeline. And that, in some ways, would give us a more accurate picture going forward. It may also yield more land need if that's ultimately the objective. So there are a number of reasons. I think one was just trying to understand the will of the council and where you're wanting to go with this body of work, and also looking at this from a technical standpoint.
Thank you. Thank you. I think you answered this already when we talked on the phone, but just to make sure, so we budgeted for 376,000. If we just went with what you're recommending, not the housing needs part, there should be a savings, I'm assuming. What could you tell me?
Yeah, I think that's right. In the short term, I think we would see a savings. We would be focusing, the scope would be narrower. We would be focusing on the employment piece. Strategically, what we're thinking is that by aligning ourselves with the next group of cities in 2027-28, provided the legislature and the LCD and all of the sort of policy objectives at the state level remain, heading in the same direction, there would be funding. We would anticipate there would be funding available from the state to do this housing needs analysis again, or to do it differently. So potentially I don't know that that's a savings, but it's mitigating our costs if we group ourselves with that next group of cities. There is risk with any alternative that you choose, including adopting the current studies, that we would be appealed, that we would have to defend the appeal. And we've tried to anticipate, we've tried to minimize the risk. So it's really a function of just how aggressive a city might be with its land needs and with its urban growth plan. And we've tried to be, and I think when the city started out on this path in the 2019 and earlier, they were really trying to be reasonable and realistic about what the needs were so that we would minimize that risk. So I think, the costs and the comparables or the other jurisdictions that James was presenting, I think, although they're somewhat, apples and oranges, I think they give us a sense that we are within the ballpark of what other jurisdictions are spending on this.
I think one thing that I kind of thinking about the short and long term is kind of, as opposed to kind of some of the previous approaches that the state's taken, where a jurisdiction would do this work and then it would kind of last for a long time. For housing in particular, the kind of process and DLCD's role on it is becoming a lot more regimented. So regardless of whether this 2021 is out of this year, or in 2027, we are getting on the state's 8-year update schedule. So kind of how the direction that the kind of state's hand in housing planning is going is every 8 years from an adoption, the city would be going through this housing planning process. And so it's kind of balancing where we're starting from onto that cycle.
So I would like to, for us to consider going for the economic side. I think that that makes sense for us. And then I think it would be a good idea to maybe explore the one-time urban growth boundary, the amendment. So that's kind of where I'm leaning. We definitely need to be getting some land in available for, you know, light industrial and that type of thing.
Can you tell me what the population, projection, the one from 2024 is for what year? 2035?
So the projections go through, I think, annually through 2040 and then
Okay.
every 5 years or 10 years up to 2070, et cetera. And I believe that the updated population projection has Newberg's kind of, so of the 20-year planning period, if the current HNA was adopted, that would be 2021 to 2041. With the new projections, it's approximately, I think, 2,000 residents more. So just that kind of slight increase than it would have been. So moving from 2021 to 2041, it'll be approximately 2,000 more residents than we would have seen under this projection.
So let me make sure I'm understanding it right. So using the 2024 forecast for population, it would put the 2041 population at 2,000 more people than the 2021 forecast did?
Approximately.
And what is that number? Do you remember?
We can
pull it up.
that up while we're. Yeah,
It's not
yeah.
urgent.
Interestingly, when we looked at that updated forecast, the city manager has it. But I was just gonna add that the new forecast, when they projected it out, they go out 50 years, I think. It's a very long-range forecast, and it'll be reviewed and updated every 4 years, but it was showing Newberg surpassing McMinnville at one point, which wasn't the case under the prior forecast. So for what it's worth, it's still a relatively modest rate of growth that they're forecasting for all of us.
Perhaps for entertainment value, while they're looking that up, I can say with some confidence that our population number early next decade is going to be over 31,000. So if this rate of housing production continues, we could expect that. So something to kind of bear in mind while we wait for that number. And it would be really delicious for us to surpass Mac as long as we have an Indian restaurant. Because that's the one thing that's really, I mean, I think it's a gap that we have. Although I don't think any of these surveys address that necessarily. A curry.
City manager worthy, that's why the council might want to prioritize the economic work.
Yeah. Yeah, quick back of the napkin, 200 housing units-ish, 2.5 humans, multiply by 6 years. 31,000-ish, crystal ball gazingly.
So the 2021 projection was 33,199, and the new one is 35,194 in 2041. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have questions for staff or wish to make a motion?
Okay, well, I move that we accept the two recommendations by staff as written.
So those are written as two separate motions. Can we do them separately?
Okay, sorry. I move that we, accept recommendation number 1 from the staff as written.
Second.
Have I got it right? Recommendation 1 is a sequential urban growth boundary update? Or is it, am I backwards? Yes, it is the sequential update.
You want to read it?
Yes,
There it is.
Okay. So it's been moved and seconded. Staff recommends that our staff, how do I want to word this? Sorry, my computer's down, so I've got to work off the projector. You want to restate your motion?
Sure, how about I just read it for you? I move that we have staff request that the Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development modify the city's sequential UBG work program to include adoption of an economic opportunities analysis only and reschedule the city's adoption of an updated housing needs analysis or housing capacity analysis and housing production strategy to align with the Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development's 2027-2028 schedule for compliance with state housing requirements.
All right, so it's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. Aye.
Mr. Mayor, may I, just as an administrative matter, the work program that you've just directed us to ask for a modification was adopted or approved by resolution by this council. So we would ask that we can come back to you with a resolution making that request. And likewise, we'll need to go to the County Board of Commissioners to ask them to approve the same modification, just so you're aware of that. Thank you.
That'd be wonderful. Could you also include a copy of the current EOA that we're talking about approving in the packet? That'd be great. So move on to the next item. Whether to explore a one-time urban growth boundary amendment as provided by Senate bill. Go ahead, Robin.
I move that we consider or we explore a one-time UGB amendment as provided by Oregon State Senate Bill 1537.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? I personally think that we should ask staff to take a look at the map and see if we have any land that would even be qualified in this, before we go any further at all. Does that sound reasonable? Mike?
I would think that that would kind of be a given. That they would probably do. I mean, I have not, but I'm assuming that when they proceed on this, that would be one of the first things that they would be considering and looking at. And if we don't have it, they'll come back to us and say, we don't have it, guys.
I'm pretty certain that's what you guys told us you would do, right?
Okay. Any further discussion? And all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. All right, thank you. All right, next is our notice of funding availability of applications for the Newberg construction excise tax. Look around here. Shall we take a break real quick, or are we good? All right. Could we take a 5-minute break or so, and we'll come right back? Thank you. All right, let's continue.
Are you ready for me or? Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Good evening, council. I'm Leanne Wagner, one of the assistant planners for the city. And tonight I will be presenting the Affordable Housing Commission's recommendation for the Construction Excise Tax Fund Awards for the 23-24 fiscal year. bottom here. There we go. To start, I'll touch on the main points of the Construction Excise Tax Fund, which, or CET for short, for those who may not be as familiar. In November of 2020, the city of Newberg adopted a construction excise tax fund, which allowed the city to collect a 1% tax on the value of an eligible building permit. The intention of this revenue stream was that it be used to address affordability issues for homeowners or renters within Newberg for households earning less than 80% of the median family income, which in 2023 was $114,400 for a family of 4. The collection of the CET expired on July 1st of 2023, and refunds for eligible applicants per ordinance 2023-2917 have been processed and finalized. And after the subtraction of the 4% administrative fee and refunds, the CET funds remaining total $1,434,287.92. And there are fairly explicit guidelines on how the fund can be used. Firstly, per ORS 320.192 and 195, a 4% administrative fee shall be deducted or allocated to the city from the gross CET revenue. And this is calculated prior to any refunds. After the 4% administrative fee is deducted, the funds are further broken down into 2 major categories. For CET collected from residential projects, 50% is to go towards developer incentives, 15% is to go to the Oregon Housing and Community Services Department, and 35% is to go to fund developer incentives and affordable housing programs. And likewise, after that 4% admin fee comes out, the CET collected from commercial projects shall go towards developer incentives and affordable housing programs at a rate of 100%. Now, this slide is just a graphic representing how the CET funds are broken down through the various stipulated allocations. At the top, we see the gross fees collected totaling $1,564,961.67. Then we see the 4% admin fee coming out and the interest being added in. And then we see the refunds coming out. Then we move to the left and right with the residential and commercial categories. From the residential on the left, we see the breakdowns between the developer incentives for Oregon Housing and Community Services and the developer incentives and affordable housing categories. And then on the right with commercial, that 100% being allocated to developer incentives and affordable housing programs. And then lastly, at the bottom, we see that we have $411,831.90 for developer incentives, $123,549.57 for the Oregon Housing and Community Services, and finally, $898,906.45 for that developer incentives and affordable housing category. And I just wanted to touch briefly on eligibility for CET recipients. In general, they should be organizations with an interest or goal of developing or preserving affordable housing in Newberg, such as the types of organizations listed here: governmental subdivisions, community development corporations, local housing authorities, nonprofit housing organizations, and so forth. Now moving on to the eligible applicants for this year's CET fund awards, we have 2 that emerged from the NOFA process, which I will go into next. First is the Yamhill County Affordable Housing Corporation with their Project 2024 Newberg Home Rehabilitation Program. And this affordable housing program provides housing repairs for very low and low income households in Newberg, and they're requesting a sum of $262,500. And next is the Catholic Charities of Oregon Edlin and Company Community Wellness Collective in partnership with Providence. Their development project is called the Heart of Newberg, and their application describes a comprehensive affordable housing project with recuperative, permanent supportive, and workforce housing to be constructed in 2 phases on property donated by Providence, and they are requesting a sum of $397,050 with consideration for the legacy dispersal. And this slide is just to talk about that process a little bit. This year, we posted the CET fund notice of funding availability on January the 11th of 2024, and the deadline for applications was April 4th of 2024. And similar to the process for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, staff process applications for the CET fund by reviewing, then deeming completeness before bringing to the Affordable Housing Commission. And on April 24th, the Affordable Housing Commission met and deliberated on the submitted applications for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and CET monies. By the end of the meeting, the commission had recommendations for City Council. And from that meeting, the Affordable Housing Commission's recommendation is that Yamhill County Affordable Housing Corporation be awarded the amount of $262,500 from the CET fund first round allocation. And secondly, that Catholic Charities of Oregon et al. Be awarded the remainder of the first round CET fund monies to be determined after the final refunds from the fund were processed by staff. And that amount is determined to be $48,238.35. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, that's correct. And 35 cents by staff after the stipulated refund deadline. Therefore, staff is requesting that City Council adopt resolution number 2024-3941, awarding construction excise tax funds to Yamhill County Affordable Housing Corporation in the amount of $262,500 and to Catholic Charities of Oregon et al. In the amount of $48,238.35. And lastly, staff is seeking City Council direction on the remaining $1 million for a second legacy notice of funding availability and award cycle to support affordable housing, and direction regarding the allocation of the $62,598.47 administrative fee pursuant to Newberg Municipal Code Section 3.60.100, equal to 4% of the gross CET taxes collected to be received by the city. And I'll mention that while the CET fund was being collected, that 4% was being used to support the salary of the housing planner, who is no longer with the city and has not been replaced by another designated housing planner. Those responsibilities more recently have been shared by the director, the planning manager, and myself. Therefore, there's the question of how council would like staff to utilize that fee. So, thank you. Any questions?
All right. Is there any discussion? Mike?
Well, I would like to see all of the money go to the Yamhill County Affordable Housing. The $48,238.35, I think we ought to add to the $262,500. That's going to go to help Newberg residences, people here immediately. We used a tax that was done to tax and housing, building directives here in this town, and I think we ought to use it to help the people that we taxed. And so the other thing is that the Catholic Charities, I mean, they're going to need a lot more money, and this is kind of a drop in the bucket. And so my feeling is we give it the $48,238.35, add it into the other, and give it all so that it can be used immediately, and we don't have to wait for on down the road for something else. It's going to help our people right here. That's my feeling about it.
I haven't talked to Mike about this, but I concur completely. I didn't think about the immediacy, but the the Catholic Charities does good work, but I believe, if I'm not mistaken, some of those patients and will be coming in from other towns and so forth. So I would like to see it used all for the Yamhill County organization that's repairing these mobile homes for citizens.
It's generally not. Generally, when somebody requests a certain amount of money, you don't exceed that amount. James, can we even do that?
So the short answer is yes, but I put a comma right after that, yes, Mayor, because we would want to document how not only the funds that were requested were awarded, but any sort of excess funds, because of the kind of restraints, if you will, on how these funds are spent. So we want to be careful, although you could technically grant funds that exceed the ask. It's important that the actual use and the contractual obligations with respect to that use per the grant agreement are tight.
I'm gonna abstain from voting on this one just because of my closeness to the second project, but I would just say that for the CET dollars, we weren't taxing Newberg residents. We were the CET is a tax on developers. Yeah.
That's true, but it's
Okay. Okay, I can finish though, right? Okay. And then secondarily, I do think it's important to remember that any project that we are going to approve, one has ample opportunity for other grant opportunities through state and feds, which Housing Authority of Yamhill County does and will continue to have, as does Catholic Charities of Oregon. And yes, their project is going to be $40 million or whatever it is. So it's a drop in the bucket. And I don't have any, if we're able to give the full funding to Housing Authority of Yamhill County, I don't have any concerns with that. But I'm not gonna vote on this one.
All right, the very same statement was made by the chairman of the Affordable Housing Committee, that this really isn't taxpayer money. I will bet you that the three people who live over here, who I talked to, who spent an extra $3,500 to buy their house because of that fee, and because they're residents of Newberg, are taxpayers. That is absolutely taxpayer money. You're not charging a developer here. He's passing that money along to the taxpayers, the citizens of Oregon or of Newberg, and it is, for in fact, taxpayer money.
Question for you, James. Would you recommend that we delay this and have the Yamhill County organization resubmit, or what? I mean, I don't know if we need to slow it down or not. I redirect my question to my fellow counselors and the mayor.
Well, I'm assuming, James, maybe you can find that out, or the city manager can check into that, is they probably put this bid in because they had that many homes or whatever of people that have filled out applications or asked to have help. So if they knew that they had some additional funds, they'd probably have people that they could use it on, or we hang on to that and they apply for it next year, something like that. I don't know, but I just think I want it to go to Newberg people here.
There are actually 68 mobile homeowners that are requesting this help. What they requested, this 262, it would take care of 18 families. So if we did give them additional money, it would just go towards helping a lot more. So there is a need.
Yeah, I would just add that there is an extensive waiting list. And it's not just mobile homes, but there's quite a lengthy waiting list for this program.
I just wanted to add that when it comes to the kind of the legal landscape of whether you can award more than the amount requested, the technical answer is yes, but there's a practical component here, which is why Councilor Kilberg's question is an excellent one, which is you have an application submitted to you for a certain funding amount. The resolution in front of council authorizes my office and the city manager to draft a grant agreement. We'd be working from that application or that proposal to come up with not only the size of the award, but the actual use of the funds, because we want to have a contractual obligation that those funds are being spent in the way represented, in a way that's consistent with state law and with local code as well. So as a result, it aids the drafting process if there is a application that reflects the funding that comes through. But I say that with the understanding that that is a practical component as the person who will be taking the pen and drafting this versus a legal component of what you legally can do.
Perhaps one possible way to assist with James's thought is if first we had a motion to scope one course of action or another between these possible ones, and then from there, we could then discover the will of recipients, the potential will of recipients, and then we could come back to a future council meeting with the documentation in line in the way that my honourable colleague has suggested.
You have a question? I was just gonna make a motion, but if we still have
I
some
just had
questions.
I just had one more. So in the case of the Catholic Charities, is it twofold? Well, how, I keep looking at Mike, sorry, just because, because of the length of the duration of how long it will take for the project. And there's an idea that these people are not from Newberg. That's not my understanding, that it would be for Newberg through Yamhill County residents.
Well, part of it is the length of the project. The other part is I want to immediately be able to help Newburgh people. And the third part is my concern is I don't want these houses built right along Highway 99W. And I'm gonna just be honest. I am concerned that if we're gonna be helping some people that are coming from Portland, I know they will probably, and it just brings more people in from Portland that have issues and when there's lots of facilities and places up in Portland that can help. And I don't want to see that happening.
I'm just trying, follow on. I'm just trying to myth bust that this is a project to bring people from Portland, because this has been 8 years in the making with Providence and with the Workforce Housing Consortium that's led by the Missing Middle Housing Group with Nathan Wildfire and Abisha Stone at Sedcor. This is absolutely not to bring people from Portland here. It's to care for those individuals that are currently going through our hospital system. So I could tell you story after story of cancer patients living in their car, so.
Anybody want to make a motion? Anybody want to discuss what we should do with the money? Yes, Peggy.
I'm not real clear on what the city manager recommended the wording be.
So, Honourable Councillor, it's not so much a recommendation on what you do, that's your decision, of course. What I suggested was a motion directing staff one way or the other, so that we would then know what the will of council is, and we would then, let's say, for example, the motion was to leave the package as it is, so that we would then just proceed. But a motion might be, go forth and talk to Yamhill and see if they would be willing to receive all of the money as an alternative course of action. But this isn't a recommendation. I'm just saying, before we can draft documentation in the way that James has highlighted, a motion just capturing the will of council would really give us a clear direction.
Thank you. Yeah, and I just meant your recommendation for wording, not which way to go. So I move that the council direct staff to talk to the Unhill County Affordable Housing Corporation to see if they would like an additional 48,000 and some dollars, and then proceed from there at a future council meeting.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that we direct staff to talk to Yamhill, it's not the housing authority anymore. Yes, thank you. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. And
I could vote.
you did vote? Okay, I abstained, so there we go. All right, so the second part, or the next part, direction on the remaining $1 million for a second legacy notice of funding availability. As you all are aware, I have been working with a group of business people and town leaders to work on a legacy project. We could be ready to present this project in November, if that works for staff, and if that works for council, that would be the time. And of course, Catholic Charities is going to make a proposal as well, I'm sure, based on what they said in their last application. So, any more discussion on what to do here?
Well, Mayor, I'd like to, could we get something on the docket here to look at what you've been working on? I'd like to have some idea of what we're looking at, and just not all of a sudden have this big package dropped in front of us in November. I'd like to have a little bit of leadway to understand what are we gonna be looking at. Can you come back maybe not the next one, but maybe the following council meeting and give us an idea? What are we kind of gonna be looking at? What's involved? Just an update.
Counselor, I will be happy to chat with you about it and tell you what we've got going on. We are not ready to go to the public yet. We are talking to a few fundraisers and so forth, but we're probably a month away from having the details work out enough to go. But if anybody wants to hear about the project, contact me outside of the council. I'll be happy to share it with you. Elise?
I would just say it's important to me that it's publicly noticed and that, all parties have same opportunity to apply, because I'm sure there's lots of interested developers and groups that would want to apply for something like this.
Yeah, it's my understanding that we have to go through that process. We have to do a NOFA. And then.
I mean, a genuine one,
Yeah,
like that we're actually going to consider all applications that come through. Right.
it was staff's intention to go through. You saw that chart that I put up there where we're, receiving applications by a due date, and then we're assessing completeness and then going to the Affordable Housing Commission for them to score. That was what staff envisioned for this second round. So we were just kind of trying to gauge when council would want to initiate that process. So.
I just have a concern that this is at least the second housing, and it's absolutely our authority to not take the recommendation of the committee that's supporting the recommendations, but I think that this is the second one that we have have not gone with their recommendation. And is there a way for us to circle back on this notice of funding to be more clear as to what we're looking for, so that it doesn't end up here and then they feel like they've wasted their time? Especially with such a large, $1 million legacy project, I think all of us probably have pretty similar aligned vision around what we want to see come out from that. I think it would be helpful to give some direction to them as to, this is what we're really hoping to see. We may have some disagreements, but I think we could all get on the same page and maybe use it as a work session item as to what are the three tenets we're trying to accomplish, so that people that are applying don't waste their time.
Well, I don't know if you're addressing it to me or not, but, the problem is the vagueness of the law. I mean, it says it's got three things that it says you can use the money for. And those three things are so broad that almost anything in the world could be, so we can't possibly. Okay.
I'm saying though that, yes, those couple of things are very clear in the law as to what the money can be used for, but all of us, I think it would be, as an applicant, great to know that the council has alignment around wanting to support existing homes in Newberg, or single family homes, or interested in, mixed income housing unit, no interest in permanent supportive housing, for example. I think it would be helpful to have that, unless we're going to have people go through the application process, bring in developers, have them spend a lot of time and money putting together a project proposal that then we all know probably we would not select. Just my thought.
I don't disagree with anything you're saying. I watched the Affordable Housing Committee go through these, and they had very limited information. Staff had, evaluated the projects and told them that these two met the criteria. So they did the best they could based on that. I personally don't think that any of these uses are good enough for money, and that's frankly why I was interested in killing the tax in the first place, because I have a classmate, somebody I've known since first grade, who was part of the last go around on getting his mobile home fixed up. He lives over there on Deborah, and he got a deck. They spent 10 grand on a deck for him, and he said, "Bill, that is just such a blessing." He said, "I'm getting ready to sell my house. Now I'm going to make more money on my house." I'm like, okay. I mean, all we're doing is taking money away from three people and giving it to another one. There's nothing in there that's sustainable. What I wanted to see this money be used for is something that's sustainable, durable, not unlike the project that Providence is working on. But we decided to take this 300,000 and use it for something like this. So the two projects are not, in my opinion, even close to being the same. And if it were up to me, I wouldn't be spending any of this money on these projects. It's a blessing for the people that get their houses built, but it did not do anything to help the community. The house is still way beyond its useful life, and there we go. So that's my opinion. Anybody else? So I guess your direction, unless if anybody nods or shakes their head, is to go ahead and schedule the NOFA for November, December, and anybody disagree? Derek? All right,
Mr.
and then the
Mayor,
other item is allocation of the,
Mr. Mayor, may I? I'm sorry to interrupt. It'd be helpful for staff to know, if you would like the Affordable Housing Commission to review that NOFA before it comes before you. It's a scheduling, question for staff.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
what is, we're trying to follow the recommendations. We followed one of them.
Thank you.
So the next item is the allocation of the $62,000, which I'm assuming the city manager would like to see in the general fund. Anybody disagree with that? All right, how about we just, yes, Will?
Actually, yes. I think given the headwinds from the SRO decision, just leaving it in the general fund generally is probably prudent. So, thank you, sir.
With council's permission, we may want to look at that a little bit closer because the administrative fee, from a statutory standpoint, it's set up as permissive in nature. So the city may collect an administrative fee for the purpose of implementing the tax, the cost of implementing the tax. Now, the city obviously can elect not to use it for that purpose. But if you elect not to, the question becomes, does it now just become, what kind of dollars are we talking about? Are these dollars that have no restrictions, or are they still subject to the remaining provisions, state statute and local authority? I want to take with council's permission, I want to take a look at that before we go right to the general fund.
I'm looking right over your shoulder at Katie back there. She looks like she has something she wants to say. Will, that all right with you?
Yeah, I was just disappointed.
Legal and finance, always, yeah.
Well, as a practical matter, it's kind of tough. I mean, it's supposed to pay for the administrative costs of administering the tax and the awards. But in actuality, it's all done before you've collected the 4%. And so if you want to get very stringent and technical, it goes to the salaries of the people who are working on these things, like
That's what
Leanne and Scott. So there must be a way to even if it goes back into a salary fund or something.
And the salary fund in question is called the general fund for the planners.
Sure, and I'm not, this isn't me saying we can't do it. I just, anytime I hear it going right to the general fund, I think, okay, let's take a close look. I am a fan of the creativity, and if the path leads us back to the general fund, I like to make Katie and Will smile. So let me.
All right, then we're back. Does anybody, how about if we want to put it in the general fund, raise your hand. I don't see any objections to that. So as long as legal can work it out, let's get that done. Thank you. It's time for waste management. Come on out. I personally like the way that they bring three big guys in here all the time to talk to us.
Good evening, Mayor and City Councilors. Yeah, we're back after 2 weeks, and I certainly don't want to regurgitate what we have presented the last two times, but it appears that the administrative review was put forth a resolution to make a motion to either approve the 1.9% rate increase or not approve it this evening. So with that, I just certainly open it up to any questions that you may have. If you have further questions.
Last time, my honourable colleague reminded us via text message that perhaps the best way to do this would be to have a hearing on the topic. And that's why we brought this back in the format that it's in. So this is going to be in the form of an administrative hearing. And so that would be our flow of events to recognise what we've discussed last time.
I don't have my administrative hearing script with me. Jan, you're up. All right, I call this meeting to order. Declaration of conflicts of interest or abstentions from any of the city councils? There are none. Staff report? Is that you, Will?
Yes, sir. Council may approve resolution number 2024-3948 or approve another fee or term adjustment to the franchise by motion. Our summary of the situation is that Newberg's franchise agreement with Waste Management, the franchise agreement would expire in September 28 unless renewed. Last time, we had discussed a continuation of the existing contract, but with a 1.9% rate increase effective September 1st of 2024. Council may, of course, choose to deliberate further on this matter, but the staff report indicates that it appeared that last time it was the will of council that this agreement seemed to have some traction amongst the councillors, as I have just described it. Thank you.
All right, we have no public testimony, so I'm closing public testimony. And our recommendation from staff is going to be what we just heard a minute ago, right?
Yes, sir. I believe I could say confidently that the consensus among councillors appears to be to accept that percentage increase as listed, but also continue with the current contract so that Waste Management can continue to shine as it has done. Thank you.
So it's time for council deliberation. Robin?
Okay, so resolution 2024-3948 is the 1.9 and the continuation until 2028. So approving that is with those terms.
Yes.
So we need to decide which of the two options we're going to choose. The full increase for a short period of time or the 1.9% agreement to renew the franchise agreement for an additional 7 years. Is that correct? We still have to decide one or the other?
So you have the two options that were presented at the last meeting as part of the slide deck produced by Waste Management. This resolution contains what I would call a third option, which was discussed at the last meeting. And that my understanding of that was a 1.9% increase with the current term unchanged. So the 2028 expiration on that term. So council, as a result of the administrative hearing, you can select any of those options. You can come up with a different option if you'd like during the course of your deliberations. But those are the items that are in front of you.
Oh, sure.
Unusually, I propose to read it. So if accepted, this would be that the City of Newberg resolves as follows: a rate increase of 1.9% of each service fee established under the service rate schedule in the franchise agreement would hereby be approved effective September 23rd, 2024. The term would be affirmed to continue as discussed previously, expiring in September of 2028. That would be affirmed. And the authorization, the City Council hereby authorizes and directs the City Manager to modify the franchise agreement to implement a 1.9% increase as described in this resolution. So that is what lies before us.
I do want to thank you, gentlemen, for working with us. I know we put you between a rock and a hard place, and we understand your constraints as well, but I think it's the right thing for our citizens, and I think they'll appreciate it. And so based on that, I move that we adopt resolution 2024-3948 as just read by the city manager.
Second.
All right, it has been moved and seconded that we, approve 2024-3948. Is there any more discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Aye.
Let's have a vote by hands here. All in favor signify by raising a hand. All opposed? Just, the motion passes, but out of curiosity, what is your objection?
I'm just gonna try and stay consistent. I voted against the increase on our water fees. You know, I think we ought to just hold the line. Everybody's hurting. I understand that. But they're making extra money off of the extra homes that are coming online, the extra apartments and stuff that are coming online. I just want to be consistent. I'm feeling we should just hold the line and not have a rate increase at all.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate you making that clear for us. All right. So
Can you close the hearing?
I need to close the administrative hearing. Done. And is there any more business before we adjourn? Will.
A very late breaking piece of information. Thank you to Russ Thomas. He's done some lookups and has discovered that solar energy production at the level of 59.6 on our monthly total would represent 64 average homes, and the average production at the other time of year, if it was 47.3, would represent only 51 homes. So the energy production varies between approximately 50 and 60 homes, depending on the season, and of course, much less in the dead of winter.
Gentlemen, thank you. We promise not to have you back before next year. This meeting is adjourned.
All right, well, I think we'll move forward with our next meeting. If everyone's ready. This is the Newberg Urban Renewal Agency meeting for August 19th, 2024. I call the meeting to order. And we have roll call.
Yes, Commissioner McBride, or Board McBride.
Here.
And Wheatley.
Here.
Darnell Holloman.
Here.
Newberg.
Here.
Rosacker.
Here.
Floyd.
Here.
And Carmen.
Here. So, committee business, item 3.1, there was changes to the NURA Citizens Advisory says Commission bylaws. Does anyone have opportunity to read those? Any objections to those?
Chair Carmen, if you desire, I can give a quick overview of this, or if you're all confident, there'd be no need.
Is everyone confident? I think we can skip the staff report. So anybody, any deliberations over this? Oh, you want, sorry, I couldn't hear you. So
I'm
I
sorry,
guess,
yes, I would appreciate a quick. overview.
Mr. Administrator, sir, will you please
you.
give us a quick staff report?
I'd be delighted to, Chair Carmen. So, at the last meeting of the NURA CAC, there was a discussion, and it was fairly wide-ranging, about what the appropriate first actions would be in terms of capital projects that NURA might choose to tackle. And after looking at a variety of options, the consensus was that they would focus on the first part of the plan as written, because they felt that that specifically helps our development very, very much. As a result of that, after deliberation, the NURA CAC debated and voted a request that Article 6, Section B be struck from their bylaws. And specifically, the purpose of this would be to not have to invent an alternative rubric at this time for weighing up different capital projects, but instead that would have the effect of leaving things as they are, which means they would begin looking at one lift station in River Street and projects in that area. It was a unanimous opinion of the NURA CAC that the time is not yet ripe to begin a holistic scoring process that might change the order of projects, and they desire to keep the plan as published for the foreseeable future. While the NURA CAC does feel that a grading rubric could be added later, the consensus is that that time is not yet ripe. And therefore, the request is, the staff recommendation is that you move to strike Article 6, Section B from the NURA CAC bylaws, which would have the effect of causing Section C to become Section B.
Thank you. Yes, Bill.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion that we approve the changes to the NURA as the city manager has just delineated.
Second?
Any other conversation? All right, all those in favor? Say aye.
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 All opposed? None. All right. The resolution 2024-11 passes, right? And then item 3.2, the letter from the committee chair, Kilberg. Is there anything that we have to do with that other than kind of just accept that letter? Mr. Administrator?
Given that the information was comfortably received at the CAC, I think it's a question of receiving the information. Yes.
Right. Do we have any discussion about that? And nothing, doesn't need to be a motion for this. All right. Any other conversation about it? All right. I will call this meeting adjourned.